Have you ever looked at a powerhouse company like Google and thought, man, I love the growth, but I really wish it paid me some cash along the way? Well, today we're diving into a fascinating financial product that tries to do just that. We're talking about an ETF with the ticker GOOW, and it's all about Google. So let's be real. If you're an investor, you've probably looked at Alphabet, Google. It's an absolute growth machine. But there's one little thing missing from the equation, a dividend. Google just doesn't pay one. They pour all that money back into growing the company, which is great for the stock price. But what if you're looking for some regular income? What if you could somehow get the best of both worlds? All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll quickly cover that classic battle, growth versus income. Then we'll meet GOOW, this new ETF that's trying to change the game. We're going to put it head-to-head with plain old Google stock to see the differences. After that, we'll pop the hood and see how this thing actually works, because it's pretty interesting. And finally, and this is super important, we'll go through the risks you absolutely need to know about. Okay, let's set the stage. In the world of investing, you're often faced with this fundamental choice between growth and income. Alphabet, ticker GOOGL, is the poster child for a growth stock, right? The whole idea is you buy it and you hope it becomes worth a lot more over time. That's your profit, the capital appreciation. But along that journey, it pays you exactly zero in income. No dividends, zilch. For a lot of people, especially those who want some cash flow, that's kind of a deal breaker. So this is where the world of finance gets creative. A new breed of fund has shown up to try and solve this exact problem. And here it is. Meet the Roundhill GOOGL focused ETF. The ticker is GOOW, and its entire reason for being is to give investors a way to get regular weekly income while still being tied to the performance of Google's stock. Now check this out. This is a quote taken right from the fund's official documents, and it tells you everything. It has two big, ambitious goals. Goal number 1, make weekly distribution payments. Goal number 2, aim for 1.2 times, that's 120% of Google's weekly return. So it's not just trying to match Google, it's trying to give it a little turbo boost. That extra kick is from something called leverage, and we'll get into that in just a bit. All right, so how does buying this ETF really stack up against just buying Google stock? Let's put them in the ring and see how they compare side by side. Looking at this chart really lays out the trade-offs, doesn't it? With regular Google stock, you're a direct owner. You get a say with voting rights, but as we know, zero income. With the GOOW ETF, you get indirect exposure, no voting rights, but you get the potential for that weekly cash. And then you see the other two massive differences. Leverage, where GOOW is trying to juice the weekly returns by 20%, and of course the cost. And let's zoom in on that cost for a second. GOOW comes with an annual management fee of 0.99%. Now, to put that in perspective, for every $10,000 you have invested, you're paying them about $99 a year, every year, just for running the fund. That's a fee you just don't have when you own the stock directly. Okay, so the big question is, how in the world does this thing actually work? How does it squeeze weekly income and leverage out of a stock that has neither? Well, it's not magic. It's actually some pretty clever financial engineering. So let's pop the hood and take a look at the engine. First up, let's talk more about that leverage. That 1.2x exposure means that if Google stock has a good week and goes up, say 1%, GOOW is designed to go up 1.2% before fees. Sounds great, right? But, and this is the part you really have to remember, it's a double-edged sword. If Google drops 1%, the fund is designed to drop 1.2%. Leverage turns up the volume on everything, the good and the bad. So the main tool they use to do this is something called a total return swap. It sounds complicated, but here's the gist. Instead of buying tons of Google stock, the fund makes a deal, usually with a big bank. The fund says, hey, we'll pay you a fee, and in exchange, you pay us whatever the total return of Google stock is. It's kind of like renting the stock's performance without having to own it. This is the mechanism that lets them get that 1.2x exposure. So how does that all translate into a check for you? Well, it's basically a 4-step recipe each week. Step 1, they track how Google stock did. Step 2, they apply that 1.2x leverage factor. Step 3, a special formula kicks in that looks at that performance, but also how bumpy the ride was, the volatility. And finally, step 4, based on all that, it spits out a distribution amount. The key takeaway here is that this amount is not fixed. It's going to change week to week. So we've seen this shiny side of the coin, weekly income from a growth stock. But you know the old saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch, especially in investing. And that brings us to the risks. This is the part of our explainer you really need to pay attention to.
Look, I'm going to say this one more time just because it's the single most important risk to get. Leverage magnifies everything. A bad week for Google can be a really, really bad week for GOOW. This fund is built to be more volatile than just owning the stock outright, period.
Now, because the fund uses those swap contracts, you're taking on some unique risks. First is counterparty risk. That's a fancy way of saying, what if the big bank on the other side of that deal gets into trouble and can't pay up? Then there's liquidity risk. These swaps aren't like stocks you can sell in a second. They can be harder to get out of. And finally, correlation risk. The whole thing is supposed to track Google, but it might not do it perfectly. There can be a mismatch. And then there's the really obvious one, non-diversification. You know that saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket? Well, this ETF is pretty much the definition of a single basket. Its entire fate is tied to one company, Google. If Google hits a rough patch, say a new regulation, a huge competitor, anything, this fund is going to feel every single bump. Okay, and this last one is so important, and it's probably the most misunderstood part. That weekly payment, it's called a distribution, and there's a reason they don't call it a dividend. A big chunk of it could be something called return of capital. In plain English, that means the fund might just be handing you your own money back. It's not profit. Think of it this way. You give me $100, and next week I give you $5 back and say, look, a return. But it was really just part of your original 100. That's the idea. And this has tax implications. While you might not pay tax on it today, it lowers your initial investment cost, which could mean a bigger capital gains tax bill when you eventually sell. So it all boils down to this one central question. On one hand, GOOW is an incredibly innovative product. It offers the chance to get weekly income from a stock that pays none, plus that little bit of leverage. But on the other hand, it comes with a whole package of higher fees, the double-edged sword of leverage, weird derivative risks, and some pretty tricky tax stuff. So is that promise of a weekly check worth all the extra complexity and risk? That's the trade-off you really have to think about.